The loudest sound in a room full of people is the sudden absence of their voices. One second, my father was mocking my entire life choice in front of 40 wedding anniversary guests, and the next, a legendary combat veteran sitting beside him looked like he had just stared into the abyss. My father asked with a smug grin what my radio identifier was, expecting me to name a desk job. When I softly murmured the word Nightfall, the heavy crystal tumbler slipped straight out of the old veteran's hand and struck the mahogany table. It did not shatter, but the sharp impact forced the entire room to fall completely silent. As the color drained from his weathered face, my father simply laughed, totally misreading the heavy tension in the air, and asked the man if he actually recognized the name. The veteran did not look at my formal attire or my high military standing, but rather stared directly into my eyes as if he were suddenly transported back to a dangerous place he never expected to escape alive. He leaned across the table and whispered that my father had absolutely no idea who his own daughter really was. At that exact moment, not a single relative at the celebration understood the weight of those words. But before the evening concluded, every person in that room would uncover a secret that had been buried deeply for nearly a decade. My name is Vanessa Vance, and I am a highly decorated operational military pilot. This is the true story of the exact night my father finally stopped laughing at my expense. The entire event was meant to celebrate his milestone 75th birthday at a sprawling mountain retreat just outside Colorado. Warm string lights illuminated the massive wooden rafters, while classic music played faintly through the sound system. It was a massive gathering packed with old neighbors, distant relatives, and corporate colleagues. This was the exact environment my father cherished, because it allowed him to command the entire room and recount his own achievements for hours. I arrived quite late to the party because my military flight from the East Coast faced severe weather delays. Walking inside the main hall, I immediately felt dozens of familiar eyes tracking my movement across the floor. Some looks were warm, but most were deeply judgmental, which was the exact treatment I had received from my family for years. I wore simple civilian clothing because I never had any desire to impress these people. My older sibling Bradley approached me first, offering a very brief greeting before mentioning that our father was already several drinks into the evening. I knew exactly what that meant for the night ahead. For the vast majority of my adult life, my father dismissed my demanding military career as nothing more than an expensive and dangerous phase. When I accepted my appointment to the elite academy, he claimed I was throwing my life away. When I earned my flight wings, he credited it to pure luck, and every subsequent promotion was treated as a temporary distraction. Meanwhile, Bradley could win a minor property dispute at his law firm, and our father would boast about it to the neighbors for months. I learned long ago that you cannot buy validation from someone who has already committed to denying it. I quietly took an empty seat near the far end of the long dining table, hoping to remain unnoticed. My father spotted me instantly from across the room and loudly announced that the great sphere had finally decided to grace them with her presence. The entire crowd chuckled at his sarcasm while I simply smiled politely and wished him a happy birthday. He patronizingly asked if I was busy rescuing the world again, which drew even more laughter from his friends. Dinner was served shortly after, and the room filled with standard conversations regarding sports, local politics, and growing old in a fast world. Eventually, a pleasant neighbor sitting near me made the mistake of asking about my current military deployment. As I opened my mouth to respond, my father quickly interrupted to inform everyone that I merely taught people how to operate flight simulators. A few guests nodded along, asking if it was basically like playing advanced video games, which made my father laugh heartily. I looked down at my plate, debating whether to correct the massive lie or just let it go, because I was simply too exhausted to fight. However, the retired Special Forces operative sitting nearby was listening very closely. The veteran, whose name was Arthur, frowned deeply and looked directly at me with sudden intensity. I calmly spoke up and stated that my father was mistaken because I actually piloted active aircraft in real operations. My father leaned back in his chair with a patronizing smirk, asking if I meant actual real airplanes. The condescending tone made the words sound completely absurd, and the guests chuckled along with him. Then he delivered the exact challenge that altered the course of the evening, by loudly demanding to know my official combat call sign in front of everyone. Most tactical pilots never share their operational call signs with civilians, but I felt absolutely no shame regarding mine because I had truly earned it in the dark. I looked my father dead in the eye and clearly stated the word Nightfall. The reaction from Arthur was instantaneous as he completely froze with his drink halfway to his mouth. The rest of the room continued chatting for a brief moment before noticing the terrifying expression on the old soldier's face. He set his glass down with a trembling hand and stared at me like I was a ghost. Arthur muttered that it was impossible, causing the entire room to go completely quiet. My father chuckled nervously, asking the man if he actually knew me from somewhere. The veteran ignored him entirely, keeping his gaze locked onto me while repeating my call sign under his breath. I gave him a single firm nod, and his jaw instantly tightened as he struggled to process the reality. I recognized that specific expression immediately, because combat survivors often carry traumatic memories that can be triggered by a single word or a familiar voice from their past. My father completely misunderstood the heavy silence and jokingly asked if his daughter was somehow famous. Nobody else laughed because the raw emotion radiating from Arthur was palpable. The old soldier slowly stood up from his chair, causing every single conversation in the massive lodge to die instantly. The wind howled against the glass windows outside, while 40 guests waited in absolute silence for what would happen next. Arthur looked directly at my father and solemnly declared that his daughter was someone entirely different than the person he imagined, causing my stomach to knot. Nobody moved a single muscle as my father demanded an explanation for the bizarre statement. Arthur swallowed hard, his eyes moving from my face to my hands before looking back up again. He explained to the silent room that he recognized the exact call sign from a dark valley years ago. Bradley shifted uncomfortably in his seat, muttering that many pilots probably use similar names. The veteran shook his head fiercely, stating that the specific identifier belonged to only one legendary pilot who saved his life. The room remained completely breathless as the tension mounted. My sister Clara sat frozen with her fork suspended in the air, looking incredibly uncomfortable with the public scene. My father let out an impatient laugh, telling Arthur not to turn a simple family birthday into some dramatic war movie script. The veteran completely ignored him and asked me directly if I was present at the disaster in the Red Ridge Valley. My fingers tightened around my fabric napkin because that specific operation was highly classified. I kept my voice perfectly even and stated that I was legally restricted from discussing any past operational details. Arthur saw right through the standard military deflection and realized my silence was absolute confirmation. He nodded slowly, his face softening with immense respect as he realized the truth. My father leaned forward with rising irritation, demanding to know what exactly I had done during that time. The veteran turned to face him, looking older than his years, but carrying the invisible scars of a man who survived the unthinkable. He revealed that 6 years ago, his specialized unit was ambushed during a secret extraction mission that went completely wrong after their position was compromised. The entire room listened intently as Arthur explained how their vehicles were destroyed and their communications were completely jammed by enemy forces. They had multiple wounded men and absolutely no cover, while heavy weather prevented standard air support from reaching their position. My father frowned deeply, but did not interrupt the story this time. The veteran explained that his men were actively preparing to face their demise because they believed no help was coming. A strange weight settled in my own chest as the vivid memories of that terrifying night began rushing back. I could vividly recall the green glow of my night vision equipment and the violent storm rocking my aircraft over the jagged mountains. I remembered the desperate voices cutting through the radio static, pleading for an extraction they never expected to receive. Arthur continued his narration, explaining that a calm female voice suddenly pierced through their radio static, telling them to hold their positions because Nightfall had eyes on them. My father immediately flicked his gaze toward me in complete shock, but I simply kept my eyes fixed on my plate. The veteran explained that his unit believed the pilot was too far out to survive the low visibility and the heavy anti-aircraft fire coming from the ridges. Yet, against every mechanical limitation, the aircraft descended low and fast directly into the danger zone. My sister Clara softly whispered my name in disbelief, but I remained completely silent. Memories carry a massive weight, and sometimes they strike you when you least expect them. My father looked completely bewildered and angrily stated that I had never mentioned a single word of this to the family. Arthur looked directly at my father and sharply noted that perhaps nobody in the family had ever bothered to ask. The statement hit the table like a physical blow, causing my father to recline in absolute silence. For the first time, I saw a fracture in the proud wall he had spent decades constructing. Bradley cleared his throat and quietly asked if the story was actually true. I looked at my brother, who had always enjoyed being the golden child, and simply stated that I did my job. Arthur let out a breathless laugh, correcting me by stating I did far more. The veteran addressed me with absolute military deference, which sent a shockwave through the entire extended family. Everyone noticed that this highly respected soldier was treating me with immense honor. Arthur explained to the guests that I held overwatch for hours, guiding his men through thick smoke and placing my own aircraft directly in the line of fire. His voice cracked slightly as he revealed that multiple children were born and marriages walked down the aisle because I refused to abandon them in the sky when every manual dictated I should retreat. The family had absolutely no idea how to process the massive revelation after years of treating my career like an insignificant hobby. Clara lowered her utensils while Bradley looked away in shame, and my father's hands visibly trembled on the table. I suddenly remembered my flight graduation ceremony, where my father claimed he could not attend because of Bradley's minor court date. I later discovered photos of him playing golf that identical afternoon. I remembered every ignored achievement and every birthday dinner where my presence was mocked, yet a total stranger understood my worth perfectly. Arthur finally reseated himself but maintained his intense gaze, stating he never knew my civilian name, but would never forget the voice that saved his team. My father opened his mouth to speak, but found absolutely no words to rescue his pride. The veteran delivered the final blow by looking at me and stating that I saved his entire squad from certain death. The room remained completely motionless, and across the table, my father stared at me as if he were truly looking at his daughter for the very first time in his life. The admiration in the room felt incredibly heavy rather than warm, as if a private vault had been forced open without my consent. My father attempted to salvage his ego by forcing a dry laugh and claiming that war stories often become highly exaggerated over the years. The familiar ache returned to my chest as he desperately looked for a way to shrink my reality to fit his comfort level. Bradley tried to intervene, but our father snapped at him, claiming it was highly suspicious that I had never shared these details before. I carefully set my napkin down and looked directly at him, explaining that signed security agreements prohibited me from discussing classified operations. My father scoffed, calling it highly convenient, which prompted Arthur to immediately defend my operational security. My father ignored the veteran entirely, choosing to project his own insecurity onto me rather than admitting his massive error. He angrily claimed that I allowed the entire family to believe I was merely a basic flight instructor. I calmly reminded him that I had tried to share my life multiple times, but he always dismissed me. I reminded him of the specific holiday dinners where he claimed I was not doing real fighting, and the memorial service where he told guests I was still figuring things out. The specific memories caused Clara to look down in embarrassment, while Bradley closed his eyes in shame. My father gripped his drink so hard his knuckles turned white. My mother had been gone for 7 years, and she was the only person who never demanded proof of my worth, constantly leaving me sweet messages wishing for a kind sky. After her passing, my father simply grew louder, filling the void with harsh judgments and placing my achievements into smaller boxes until service became a mere phase. I let it happen for years because arguing with him was like throwing stones into an ocean, expecting the water to apologize. Arthur firmly stated that men like him do not mistake the voices that save them from the dark. My father wiped his mouth and coldly stated that flying overhead did not make someone a true hero, delivering the dismissal with polished smoothness. Before the argument could escalate, a nervous catering staff member entered the room and announced there was an urgent phone call for Captain Vanessa Vance at the front desk. My father mocked the timing under his breath as I walked away. Taking the receiver, I heard the commanding voice of my superior officer, informing me that a high-ranking general was currently inbound to my exact position for an urgent briefing. I looked out the window into the black night as the distinct, rhythmic thumping of military helicopter rotors began echoing across the valley. The massive aircraft landed in the clearing outside, drawing the entire party out into the freezing Colorado air out of sheer curiosity. The side door opened, and Major General Richard Whitaker stepped into the light, causing my father to stare in absolute disbelief as his confidence completely evaporated. The general walked past the stunned crowd directly toward me, shaking my hand and publicly praising my exceptional skills. He looked at my father and stated he had raised an incredible daughter, delivering a compliment that shattered my father's pride completely. The general revealed that I was being awarded the prestigious Distinguished Flying Cross for my extraordinary heroism in combat. Handing me the official documents, my father's face turned completely pale as decades of his harsh assumptions collapsed quietly into the dirt. Whitaker asked if these people were my true family, and after a long silence, I looked at my father and softly replied that only some of them were. The words landed heavily, and as the helicopter later disappeared into the stars, my father sat in the quiet lodge, finally ready to ask me about the sky. If you found this an emotional military story gripping, please consider subscribing to the channel for more powerful narrative experiences.